Hello and welcome to another Magic Duels gameplay. Today we're taking a look at a black-white control deck named Angel Control because it features a lot of angels as win conditions. So the idea behind the deck is to cast a lot of removal spells in the early game, so we have enough mana eventually to cast our big win conditions that are mostly angels in the late game. So let's get started and let's take a look at the entire deck here, starting out with our 1-drops where we have one copy of Deadweight just as a cheap removal spell that gives a creature -2/-2 permanently. And of course, if the creature dies, then the Deadweight goes to our graveyard, where we can perhaps get it back at some point later in the game, as we'll see later. We also have 2 copies of a Knight of the White Orchid, double white for a 2/2 first striker. When it enters a battlefield, if an opponent controls more lands than we do, we get to search our library for a Plains card and put it on the battlefield untapped. So this is a very nice card when we're on the draw, because we're naturally gonna have less lands than the opponent. So this actually ramps us and also gives us a cheap blocker that can hold back 2 toughness creatures at the very least. And it's also a human, which is important for one of the cards we'll get to later. Then we have 3 copies of Blessed Alliance as one of our removal spells. It's 2 mana for an instant, but it also has Escalate, which is a new mechanic, so we can pay 2 generic mana in addition to the mana cost to get to choose an additional mode. And the modes are: we can gain 4 life, we can untap up to 2 target creatures, and we can make an opponent sacrifice an attacking creature. So the most used mode here, of course, is the opponent has to sacrifice an attacking creature, because that's just a nice removal spell. But we can also just, if we have more mana, gain a bit of life in addition, because we do have some cards in the deck that make us pay life, so having a way to offset that a little bit is nice. And untapping 2 creatures could come up, but since we're mostly casting big creatures in the late game, it's not the most relevant ability. Then we have 2 copies of a Grasp of Darkness, just as another instant speed removal spell for double black to give target creature -4/-4. And the big difference with Blessed Alliance here is that we don't have to wait for the creature to be attacking, so we can take care of some utility creatures before they do too much damage in terms of card advantage or board presence. We have 1 copy of Declaration in Stone, which is another nice removal spell, but since we are a control deck, we don't really want to be giving our opponent too much card advantage, so giving them a clue in exchange for killing their creature is not always where we want to be, so that's why we only have the 1 copy here, and we still have many more removal spells in the deck. We have 2 copies of Oath of Liliana, which when we cast it, the opponent has to sacrifice a creature when the Oath enters the battlefield. And when we play Planeswalkers, which we do have a fair amount of in the deck, we also get a 2/2 zombie token at the end of our turn, which can help protect our Planeswalker. It's also relevant that Oath of Liliana is a legendary enchantment, because it means when we play the second copy, one of the 2 copies will have to go to our graveyard, which is actually a nice place for Oath of Liliana to be, because in the graveyard we can get it back with one of the creatures that is in the deck, and once we do get one of those copies back, one of them will again go in the graveyard, so we can keep buying back one of those copies of Oath of Liliana. So we basically get a removal spell that we can recur, which is quite nice. We also have 1 copy of Murder, just an unconditional instant speed removal spell, a little expensive at 3 mana, but still quite decent. Same with Anguished Unmaking. This one can deal with any non-land permanents, including Planeswalkers and enchantments, for example, but it does cost us 3 life. Then we also have Angelic Purge, which fits the theme of the deck nicely. We have to sacrifice an additional permanent in order to cast the Angelic Purge, but that's not a problem if we have an Oath of Liliana in play, for example, because we don't really mind sacrificing the Oath. And then we get to deal with an artifact, a creature or an enchantment, so an additional way to deal with enchantments like Sphinx's Tutelage or Fevered Visions, which can be problematic. Then 3 copies of Read the Bones, which is our card advantage card of choice. For 3 mana we get to scry 2 and then draw 2 cards at the cost of 2 life. But we have plenty of ways to offset our life loss. Then we get to some of our win conditions. We have Liliana, the Last Hope, which can shrink down opposing creatures, can give us some card advantage if we have creatures in a graveyard, and can also ultimate to make an army of zombie tokens very slowly. We have Gisela, which is our first angel, the Broken Blade, which is a 4 mana 4/3 flying with first strike and lifelink, so quite powerful. But this time around we are playing her counterpart in Bruna, so we do actually get to meld both into Brisela, Voice of Nightmares, which is a very powerful 9/10 flying first strike, vigilance and lifelink, and opponents can't cast spells with converted mana cost 3 or less, so that means that a lot of removal spells will not work on Brisela, which makes her more likely to survive. Then we also have Kalitas, a Traitor of Ghet. Since we are playing a lot of removal spells, it's pretty easy to get a few zombie tokens going, and also a nice lifelinking creature that can get bigger if we sacrifice vampires or zombies. We also have 2 copies of Languish as one of our sweeper effects, giving -4/-4 to all creatures. Another win condition in Gideon, Ally of Zendikar, which can make tokens or turn into a 5/5 creature, and can also make emblems, and this is also a combo with one of the cards we'll get to in a bit. We also have Archangel Avacyn as another powerful angel as a finisher. 4/4 flying flash vigilance, you all know her by now, and can also transform into Avacyn the Purifier to deal even more damage. Another sweeper effect in Planar Outburst to destroy all non-land creatures, can also be awakened later in the game to also give us a hasty 4/4 creature. We also have a Tragic Arrogance as an additional sweeper that can also deal with lots of planeswalkers nicely, since we can just select the weakest planeswalker and then maybe even kill that planeswalker in the same turn. So this is a nice card against the Super Friends style of decks. We have another planeswalker of our own in Ob Nixilis Reignited to draw some cards and be an additional removal spell. Another angel in Linvala the Preserver can come into play and stabilize the board, because if we're behind on life we gain 5 life, if we're behind on creatures we get a 3/3 angel, creature token with flying. We also have a Sorin, a Grim Nemesis, that can also kill stuff, gain life, draw cards, all sweet abilities. And then we get to the 2 big engine cards in the deck, which are Emeria Shepherd. For 7 mana we get a 4/4 flyer with an interesting landfall ability, so whenever we play a land, then we get to return target a non-land permanent from the graveyard to our hand, and if that land was a plains, then we can return that non-land permanent to the battlefield instead. So this is why we're running cards like Deadweight, since once we use a Deadweight and the creature dies, Deadweight will go to the graveyard, but then we might be able to get it back with Emeria Shepherd to maybe kill another creature or at least shrink it down. Also a nice combo with Oath of Liliana, since we can get the Oath back from the graveyard to keep killing creatures the opponent has. And also the nice combo with Gideon, since we can ultimate Gideon right away, which means he'll go to the graveyard and then we can get him back. And of course can just provide lots of card advantage just by getting back planeswalkers maybe, or just other angels. And then we also have a Bruna, the Fading Light, 7 mana for a 5/7 flying vigilance. When we cast Bruna, then we get to return target angel or human creature from the graveyard to the battlefield. So the obvious combo here is to play a Gisela on turn 4. The opponent has to answer it, because otherwise they probably die. And once they do answer it and we get to turn 7, we play Bruna, get Gisela back from the graveyard, and then end of turn they will melt into Brisela, Voice of Nightmares, which will probably win us the game. but we can also just get back some other angels that are in the graveyard, or even a human, and that's why we're playing the Knight of the White Orchid, which can ramp us, but can also then come back later in the game. And then our mana base, we've got 9 plains to go with the Emeria Shepherd, 8 swamps, and we can fetch those up with 4 Evolving Wilds, which is also a combo with the Emeria Shepherd with a landfall, since we get 2 landfall triggers, and this is also a way to get landfall at instant speed even during the opponent's turn, since we can just play the Evolving Wilds in our turn, and in the opponent's turn we can sacrifice the Evolving Wilds to perhaps get a plains, and that way we can get Oath of Liliana from our graveyard into play during the opponent's turn at instant speed, so that's a nice little combo. Then 2 Shambling Vent, which can turn into a lifelinking creature to also close out the game, and 2 Isolated Chapel. So that's the deck, and now let's jump into some games and see how the deck does. Alright, let's take a look at our opener, which is acceptable. We have a turn 3 Read the Bones to draw some more cards, Anguished Unmaking for some interaction, plus a win condition. Opponent goes down to 6, and we'll play Shambling Vent as our first land. And next turn probably just gonna Evolving Wilds for a swamp. So a Glacial Fortress from the opponent, blue-white. A Grasp of Darkness, not bad. So yeah, let's play Evolving Wilds, get a swamp right away here, so we don't forget. And then the plan is to play Read the Bones next turn, but that might change if our opponent plays something we need to kill with a Grasp of Darkness. Alright, that's a Westvale Abbey into Selfless Spirit. So that's the 2/1 flyer that can be sacrificed to make all creatures indestructible. So that's one we kind of want to grasp at some point, but I think I'm okay with taking 2 damage from it to use his turn to cast a Read the Bones. Maybe we draw into a sweeper so that we don't have to use spot removal on it. And also something of note with Grasp of Darkness and actually Anguished Unmaking, since this one is a -4/-4 effect and this one exiles, we don't actually care about the indestructible part of Selfless Spirit. So yeah, let's just cast a Read the Bones and maybe find a sweeper. Archangel Avacyn is also not bad. Blast Alliance is also decent, but we already have 2 removal spells in hand, so I think we just take the Avacyn, and a land is also fine. So we'll take 2 here from the Spirit. So the opponent could be on a blue-white Spirit kind of deck. Now with a Take Inventory, just draws 1 card, but the next copy is gonna draw 2 cards. So they hit us for 2. If our opponent is playing blue-white with spirits, we need to keep Spell Queller in mind, since that could counter one of our removal spells. There's a Planar Outburst, which is not bad. So we could just use a Grasp of Darkness right now on the Selfless Spirit, which I don't mind, so we don't run into the Spell Queller. And then next turn we're probably just gonna play the Archangel Avacyn. Could also activate Shambling Vent to hit for 2, gain 2, which is not terrible, since we do have a sweeper in hand, which is actually not that great versus Selfless Spirit, because it can make everything indestructible, so I think just killing the Selfless Spirit is fine here. And then might as well play a Plains and say go. You usually want to keep the Plains in hand as long as possible for Emeria Shepherd purposes. So next turn we'll play the Swamp. So 4 mana, and opponent also has a black mana available. Bygone Bishop. That's also one we don't mind killing, since it can provide a lot of card advantage for the opponent. As we draw into a Read the Bones. So we have a few options. We can just use Anguished Unmaking here on the bishop, which is reasonable. We can hope the opponent attacks with the Bygone Bishop before playing a creature, and then ambush it with Avacyn. Could just cast a Read the Bones, maybe look for a 2-mana removal spell. I think I like ambushing with Avacyn here, since it also just puts some pressure in play so we can start attacking. And if the opponent has a counter spell, then that's also fine. Opponent goes to combat. Attacks for 2, we're gonna see if they have a counter. Or maybe a spot removal spell. Alright, they're gonna tap down Avacyn instead with the Nebelgast Herald here. So they tap down Avacyn before we can block. That's fine. So we get hit for 2, opponent gets a clue token from the bishop. Kind of want to read the bones, but that's a lot of life to pay, but I don't think we have any other plays besides maybe activating Shambling Vent. But we're still at a reasonable life total that casting Read the Bones is fine, and then try to find a cheap removal spell for the bishop. Alright, Oath of Liliana will do. Knight is not really what we need here, since we're facing flyers. So let's take the Oath and see what we get. Languish is also decent. So I think we attack first and then play Oath. And then the opponent can choose if they want to keep the Herald or the Bygone Bishop. And if we ever find a Planeswalker, then we get some extra zombie tokens as well. So let's see what they prefer here. I'm guessing they keep the Bishop for the card advantage, but if they want to go on a more aggressive plan, then the Herald might be better, and they do keep the Herald, so they might want to try and kill us quickly here by tapping down Avacyn. Or maybe they have a removal spell for Avacyn. But we have lots of removal in hand, so I don't think their aggressive plan is going to work out very well. So they have a Rattle Chains, which can tap down Avacyn. And the Herald also gains Hexproof until end of turn. They can hit us for 2. And also of note, they can flash in spirits with the Rattle Chains now, so if they have, let's say, another Selfless Spirit, they could cast it right now. So what I want to do here is we could activate Shambling Vent attack with it, which is reasonable since we're still at 10. We could also just attack, cast a Languish end of turn, would kill our own Avacyn as well, which is the downside. Could also just play Bruna, try to block the spirits. But we might as well play Bruna after the Languish, so we get the Archangel Avacyn back and we get rid of the spirits. So what I'm considering here is, do we attack with the Shambling Vent and take another hit from the spirits potentially? I think that's fine, since that way our opponent may commit additional creatures to the board that we can then sweep away. And we can still keep up Anguished Unmaking. So let's attack for 6. Opponent has another Rattle Chains they want to flash in. So they could be tapping down one of our creatures here. So instead, I think in response I Anguished Unmaking the Herald. That way they don't get to tap anything down. And we get to hit with Avacyn and Shambling Vent, gain some life back that we lose here from the Anguished Unmaking. And still have Avacyn on defense. If our opponent double blocks, that's also fine, because then we get Avacyn back with Bruna anyways. And I'm also fine trading the Vent for a Spirit and 2 life. but I didn't want my opponent tapping down the Avacyn, because then we miss out on an attack, and our opponent also gets to attack us on their turn. So I think this is fine. Avacyn is gonna get angry. And opponent falls to 9. They have no board. And now Languish is a lot more appealing. Alright, they have their own Planar Outburst to sweep the board. But now we're just gonna get Avacyn back. So the opponent will need another sweeper. And Linvala, not great in this board when we're at parity. So let's just go with Bruna here. Get back Avacyn. And the opponent is facing a lethal, so they will need to find either a blocker or another removal spell. And even if they do, we still have a lot of cards left to work with. And if they're sacrificing this clue, that means they won't be able to cast another Planar Outburst. So we will probably get to hit with one of our angels. So 3 mana, they could have another Herald that they want to flash in to tap down one of our attackers. Gideon is interesting, we could minus right away to pump up our angels, but if one gets tapped down we're not dealing lethal anyways. So I think we just attack, see what happens, and then... Alright, so our opponent does have a Herald. Tap down the biggest. That's fine. Attack for 4. Opponent falls to 5. Gonna play Gideon. And I think we just make a token. And say go. Also get a zombie from Oath of Liliana. So the opponent really needs a sweeper here. And if they do, we still have Gideon left to deal lethal. Alright, Sorin, that's not bad. Can gain them a lot of life back. They could kill Gideon here or one of the angels. They're killing Avacyn. Gain 4, go up to 9. But then they're still facing lethal here. Since we have 2 5-powered creatures plus 2 2-powered creatures and they're at 9. And that weight is gonna make it even easier. Activate Gideon. Alright. We got there. Didn't even need our sweepers. On to the next one. Alright, let's take a look at our opener, which looks alright. It's gotta read the bones to find some more removal spells, and Avacyn as a win condition. 5 lands, it may be a bit much, but we do need a lot of lands for our expensive win conditions. So let's go Evolving Wilds, Swamp. So we get the shuffling out of the way before the scrying with Read the Bones, so we don't scry some bad cards to the bottom and then shuffle them back in when we sacrifice Evolving Wilds. That wouldn't be very productive. Opponent with a Hissing Quagmire. And Planar Outbursts is some good insurance against aggressive decks. Alright, Plains, so opponent on Abzan colors so far. Let's go Chapel into Read the Bones. Don't really need more lands at this point. I'll take another Read the Bones. Anguished Unmaking is tempting, but we can probably find more removal with the second Read the Bones if we need it. Alright. So next turn we can go land Read the Bones. telling time from the opponent, so there are at least 4 colors here. And a Grasp of Darkness. So let's go ahead and cast another Read the Bones. We will have to discard 2 hand size here, but that's still fine. Don't really want either of these. Alright. So what do we discard is the question. We have 4 lands in play, so this would go up to 7. So don't really want to discard a land, but I don't know if we are really gonna need these removal spells because our opponent hasn't played a creature yet. So I guess I discard a land. But hopefully that doesn't come back to bite us, because this deck does need a lot of lands to operate. So our opponent playing all 5 colors, but they're pretty slow out of the gate. Meanwhile we drew our 7-drop, so kind of getting punished already for discarding a land. But now we have an Avacyn end of turn, and if our opponent is playing 5 colors, it's pretty likely that they're a deck with lots of planeswalkers. So Avacyn does a pretty good job of killing them. So let's see if we find our first planeswalker here. Yep, there's Nahiri. So we won't quite get to kill Nahiri, since she goes to 6 loyalty right away. But at least Nahiri doesn't kill Avacyn because it has vigilance, so it won't get tapped. So Nahiri can't exile her. And our opponent discarded a Tragic Arrogance. There's another 7-drop. So probably just hit Nahiri for 4. And now the question is, do we want to commit another Angel or not? And I think it's fine to do so, since we do have these 2 Recursion Angels in hand. So if our opponent does cast something like Planar Outburst, we, if we draw a land, can at least get an Angel back. And I do want to apply some amount of pressure here, because the Planeswalker deck can get a lot of card advantage going from those Planeswalkers. But the fact that they did discard Tragic Arrogance probably means they have another sweeper in hand. So it's close here, because if your opponent untaps, uses spot removal on Avacyn, then we don't get to pressure the Nahiri. But if your opponent has a sweeper, then playing the Linvala is bad here. Think I still go for it. And hope our opponent doesn't have exactly Planar Outburst. So it looks like they might not have it. They could still plus Nahiri to try and find it. Well, they had it after all, just took them a while. Another Hissing Quagmire, plus Nahiri. And now hopefully we find a land, so we can play Bruna. Well, should have been more specific. So we do have a land, but it's not an untapped one. So Nahiri will get to plus a bunch more here, which is unfortunate. And might as well sacrifice the Evolving Wilds here for another swamp. Another telling time from the opponent. Nahiri is gonna go up to 6. Oath of Gideon is fine. No need to use Grasp of Darkness on one of the tokens. They discard a Primal Druid. Alright, Gideon is not bad, so I think we go with Bruna, and then the question is, do we get Linvala or Avacyn? So if we get Linvala, we will get the 3/3 Angel token, because Bruna is on cast, so Bruna will not be in play yet when we get back Linvala. Opponent has 2 creatures, so Linvala will make a 3/3 Angel. And this does put the most power into play to pressure Planeswalkers. So I think we do get back Linvala. And hope our opponent doesn't have a second Planar Outburst. I guess a second Tragic Arrogance would also not be good for us, because then they leave us with just an Angel. Opponent attacks with both, so we want to play around a Languish here, so we don't want to block with our 5/5, so let's just block with our 3/3, which would die anyways to a Languish. Same with Radiant Flames. So let's take one down to 20 and see what sweeper our opponent has, if any. Plus Nahiri. Maybe try and find a sweeper. They discard a big red-green creature. And a Languish. If they have Languish plus another sweeper. Kozilek's return. Alright, so at least Bruna is still alive, but Linvala is dead. So I guess we're in a decent spot. We get to attack Nahiri with our Vigilant 5/7, so they don't get to kill our Bruna. And then we get to go Gideon, make a token. Could also play Liliana. Or we could keep up Grasp of Darkness if our opponent tries to attack Gideon with one of these creature lands. Let's start by attacking Nahiri. And now we certainly play Gideon and make a token. And yeah, I think we just keep up Grasp of Darkness. That does the best job of keeping our Gideon alive if things go south. Talent of the Telepath is probably gonna find a bunch of removal for the opponent. So not much we can do about that. And it found a Tragic Arrogance, as well as an Angelic Purge, which are 2 pretty powerful options for the opponent. So Angelic Purge can exile our Bruna. But the opponent decided not to go for it, or they might have misclicked, not sure. Declaration in Stone on our Bruna, that's fine. No attacks, and end of turn sacrifice our clue. Blessed Alliance. Alright, so we can plus Gideon attack Nahiri. For opponent's last card is Grasp of Darkness. They can shrink Gideon, so Nahiri survives, but that's still fine. So do we also attack Nahiri with our Knight token is a question. And let's see, if our opponent has Grasp. Yeah, I think we do. See what happens. Alright, Nahiri down. Now we get to play the Shepherd. Play a Plains, get back. Well, Sorin is pretty tempting. So is Avacyn and Linvala. I think we go with Sorin. And then plus. Shambling Vent can enable our next landfall trigger. And now the opponent needs something pretty good to get out of this. Alright, Chandra is not a bad start, but we do have a 4-4 on defense. So they decide to -4 to sweep the board, makes sense. But they're still facing down 2 planeswalkers. Murder, so a lot of removal. The question is, do we even want to play Liliana? Because if our opponent has another Tragic Arrogance, then we might lose our other 2 planeswalkers. So I think we start by plussing Sorin and see what we draw. Evolving Wilds, and then we attack Chandra with Gideon. Could also consider Awakening Planar Outburst just to make a 4-4. Play a tapped Shambling Vent. And I don't think we play Liliana. She can get back a creature, which we could do at some point. So a lot of options, but now we can just keep up removal spells for the creature lands. Explosive Vegetation is fine. They activate Needle Spires, which is tapped. So I guess we get to grasp it now. Untap, another Evolving Wilds, let's plus Sorin. Oath of Liliana. Let's plus Gideon. Activate Shambling Vent. Attack for 7. And we could Liliana and minus her, but I don't really see a reason to. So let's just sacrifice the Evolving Wilds, get another Swamp, and keep up a bunch of removal. If we had enough mana to play Oath of Liliana and Liliana, then would have been a bit more tempting. Collective Defiance, alright. Opponent could make us discard our hand and draw that many cards. Or they could just deal 3. So I think they're dealing 3 to Sorin and making us discard our hands. I think we'll just cast the Blessed Alliance to gain 4 life. So our opponent did make us discard our hand, so don't get a chance to cast Liliana. But we did find Gisela, so if we find our second copy of Bruna, we could still meld them. So let's plus Sorin, try to find Bruna. That's an Anguished Unmaking. Alright, I guess we'll close out the game here. Plus Gideon. Activate Shambling Vent. And attack with both. And that should do it. Alright, I want to thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this gameplay. And as always, have a nice day. Alright, we get to untap, play Emeria Shepherd, play a Plains, get back, I guess Bruna, and then next turn we can play the Plains to get back Gisela. Actually, in this case, it would have been better to play a card that wasn't a Plains, that way we could have gotten Bruna back into our hand and actually cast Bruna. But I guess we'll take it. Get back Gisela. And could attack with a Bruna here, just to force a chum block. Could actually just attack with both of our angels and kill our opponent, but we want to see the transformation. Trigger, both get exiled, and there we go. Brisela, Voice of Nightmares. It was all worth it. To untap, there's another Bruna. Go to combat. And Brisela can do the honors and close out the game.